####1. Introduction. The Alien War Hero ****. The battlefield was eerily silent, a sharp contrast to the chaos that had consumed it mere hours before. Smoke still lingered in the air, curling around the jagged ruins of alien structures and charred terrain. A platoon of mixed-species soldiers huddled together around a crackling campfire, their armor dented and scratched, their faces weary. These brief moments of calm were rare luxuries, and they clung to them like lifelines. Conversations were muted, with only the occasional laugh or sigh breaking the stillness. Among them sat Commander Zyrak, a towering, reptilian figure whose emerald scales shimmered faintly in the firelight. Zyrak was a legend among the ranks, a veteran of countless battles, their name whispered with a mix of reverence and fear. Stories of their valor and tactical brilliance had spread across the Galactic Alliance, but Zyrak was more than a mere warrior. They were a symbol of unyielding strength, a leader who inspired loyalty even in the bleakest of times. Despite their fame, Zyrak remained a mystery. They spoke little, their deep, resonant voice reserved for commands and the occasional sharp remark. The platoon members had grown accustomed to Zyrak's silence, but tonight felt different. The commander sat unusually close to the fire, their yellow eyes fixed on the flames as if lost in thought. The air around them seemed heavier, charged with an unspoken tension. It wasn't until one of the younger soldiers, a feline-like creature named Veltrix, hesitantly broke the silence that the mood shifted. "Commander," Veltrix began, their voice hesitant, "is it true you served alongside humans during the Void Swarm War?" The question hung in the air, drawing the attention of the other soldiers. Conversation ceased, and all eyes turned to Zyrak. Humans were a rare topic in the Galactic Alliance, often spoken of in hushed tones. To many alien species, they were a paradox, fragile yet resilient, primitive yet ingenious. Stories about their exploits were often dismissed as exaggerations, but the mystery surrounding them only deepened the fascination. Zyrak's gaze slowly lifted from the fire, their expression inscrutable. For a moment, it seemed as though they wouldn't respond, and the soldiers exchanged uneasy glances. Then, to everyone's surprise, Zyrak spoke. "Yes," they said, their voice low but carrying the weight of countless memories. "I fought alongside humans. I learned from them. And I feared them." The admission sent a ripple through the group. Zyrak, the fearless war hero, admitting fear? It was almost incomprehensible. Veltrix leaned forward, their curiosity overriding their caution. "Feared them, Commander? Why?" Zyrak exhaled slowly, the sound akin to a rumble of thunder. "Because humans are unlike any other species in the galaxy. They are unpredictable, ingenious, and at times terrifying." The fire crackled, filling the heavy silence that followed. The soldiers waited, their anticipation palpable. Zyrak seemed to wrestle with their thoughts before finally continuing. "You see, most species are defined by their nature. The Ursalids are strong and honorable. The HFYs are cunning and pragmatic. But humans? They defy such simple definitions. Their greatest strength lies not in their technology or their physicality, but in their capacity to adapt, and in their choices." Zyrak's eyes swept over the group, their gaze piercing. "And it is those choices that make them both extraordinary and dangerous." The soldiers were captivated now, leaning closer to catch every word. Zyrak's voice took on a distant quality, as if they were no longer in the present, but reliving events long past. "I served with humans during the most harrowing days of the Void Swarm War. The swarm was relentless, a hive mind that consumed everything in its path. The Galactic Alliance was on the brink of collapse when the humans joined the fight. Many doubted their capabilities, mocking their primitive weapons and fragile bodies. But those doubts were quickly silenced." Zyrak paused, their claws tapping against the hilt of their weapon. "Humans brought with them a fire that burned brighter than anything we had ever seen. They fought with a ferocity that bordered on madness, yet their minds were sharp, their strategies ingenious. I watched them turn hopeless situations into victories, but I also witnessed the darker side of their nature. The soldiers exchanged uneasy glances, the tension mounting. Zyrak leaned forward, their voice dropping to a near whisper. They are capable of great compassion, yes, but also unspeakable horrors. Their strength lies in their duality, their ability to choose between light and darkness. And it is those choices that I will share with you tonight. The group was silent, their anticipation thick in the air. Zyrak's tales promised not just to entertain but to reveal the truth about a species that had long remained an enigma. As the firelight danced across their scales, Zyrak began their first story. "Let me tell you about Corporal Elena Reyes," they said, their tone heavy with emotion. "She was the first human I truly understood, and the first to show me what humanity is capable of." The soldiers leaned in, their breaths held as the first story unfolded, the night stretching long before them. ####2. Story 1. The Human Survivor ****. Zyrak shifted in their seat by the fire, their yellow eyes glowing faintly as they looked past the soldiers and into the shadows of their memories. The silence among the platoon was absolute, as though the night itself were listening. Then, with deliberate precision, Zyrak began their tale. "It was during the early years of the Void Swarm War," Zyrak said, their voice steady but tinged with a faint weariness. "The swarm was expanding faster than the Alliance could defend. Entire planets fell in days, their populations consumed or assimilated into that monstrous hive mind. I was assigned to a reconnaissance team tasked with infiltrating and destroying one of their key nests on the fringe of swarm-controlled space." Zyrak's claws traced absent patterns on the hilt of their weapon, the habit of an experienced soldier recalling the weight of countless battles. "Our team was a mix of species, HFY tacticians, Ursulid brutes, and myself. But the most surprising member of the group was the human, Corporal Elena Reyes." At the mention of Reyes, Zyrak's voice softened, though the weight of their words remained. "She was not what I expected of a human. She was small, even by their standards, with dark eyes that seemed to see everything and a sharpness about her that felt more like a blade than a soldier. I remember thinking she wouldn't last a day in the field. Humans, after all, are fragile creatures, physically weak, prone to illness, and with lifespans that barely warrant mention. But Reyes proved me wrong in ways I could never have anticipated." The fire crackled as Zyrak continued. "From the start of the mission, Reyes took command of our survival. She had an instinct for danger, an uncanny ability to read the environment and anticipate the swarm's movements. Where we relied on sensors and maps, she relied on something else, something I still struggle to define. Perhaps it was intuition. Perhaps it was sheer, human stubbornness. Whatever it was, it kept us alive." The soldiers around the fire listened intently, their expressions a mix of fascination and disbelief. Zyrak's stories were legendary, but rarely had they spoken with such detail or emotion. "We spent 2 weeks navigating swarm-controlled territory," Zyrak said. "Every step was a gamble. The swarm was everywhere, their drones patrolling the skies, their ground forces hunting relentlessly. Reyes took on the role of guide, using her knowledge of terrain and tactics to outmaneuver them. She was relentless, always moving, always thinking. And when we were ambushed on the 5th day, it was Reyes who pulled us out of the chaos." Zyrak's claws tapped once on the stone beside them, a habit when recounting something particularly vivid. "I'll never forget that moment. We were pinned down, surrounded on all sides. The swarm's drones descended like a black tide, their shrill cries piercing the air. Reyes didn't panic.
She didn't hesitate.
She led us through a narrow canyon she'd scouted earlier, setting traps along the way to slow the swarm. She carried one of our wounded, an Ursulid who outweighed her by more than 3 times. And somehow, she kept going." The commander's voice grew heavier, as though the memory itself bore a physical weight. "But her true test came later. We reached the nest and planted our explosives, only to be ambushed on the way out. The swarm was waiting for us. Their drones fell upon us like a storm. Reyes, she made the choice no one else could. She stayed behind." Gasps rippled through the platoon, but Zyrak pressed on. She told us to go, that she would hold them off. And she did. Alone, she fought them. We barely escaped, and when we returned to retrieve her, we feared the worst. Zyrak's eyes gleamed in the firelight. We found her alive, though barely. The swarm had captured her, taken her deep into their nest. What she endured, I cannot fully describe. They wanted information about us, about the Alliance. But she gave them nothing. They broke her body, but not her spirit. The soldiers sat in stunned silence, their faces reflecting a mix of admiration and unease. Veltrix finally asked, their voice a whisper, "What happened to hers?" "She survived," Zyrak said simply. "But she was changed. When we brought her back to the Alliance, she refused accolades or recognition. She disappeared soon after, leaving behind only her story and the knowledge that humanity's resilience is not something to be underestimated." Zyrak leaned back, their gaze once more on the fire. "Reyes taught me something that day. Humans are not defined by their fragility. They are defined by their will. They endure what others cannot, and they do so not out of obligation, but because they choose to." The fire crackled, and the night seemed to grow darker. "But their will," Zyrak added quietly, "can also be terrifying. And that, my friends, is what you must never forget." The soldiers remained silent, the weight of the story settling over them like a shroud. The fire flickered, casting long shadows across their faces as they waited for what other truths Zyrak might reveal. ####3 Story 2. The Human Monster ****. Zyrak's gaze drifted to the fire again, the embers reflecting in their yellow eyes. The soldiers remained silent, their minds still grappling with the tale of Corporal Reyes. But as Zyrak shifted their posture and spoke again, their tone grew colder, heavier. "If Reyes was an example of humanity's indomitable spirit," Zyrak began, their voice a low rumble, then Major Daniel Carter was a testament to something darker. Something far more unsettling. The soldiers exchanged uneasy glances, sensing that this story would be far more grim than the first. It was during the liberation of Arthenos III, a colony world that had been overrun by pirates. Arthenos was a strategic outpost for the Alliance, rich in resources and positioned close to the front lines of the war. The pirates who controlled it were brutal and unrelenting, using the colony's inhabitants as hostages and slaves. The Alliance had tried multiple times to reclaim the planet, but every effort ended in failure. Zyrak paused, their claws idly tracing the hilt of their blade. That was when the humans were brought in. Among them was Major Carter, a tactical officer renowned for his unconventional strategies. His reputation preceded him. To his allies, he was a hero, a man who always got the job done, no matter the odds. To his enemies, he was a nightmare. Zyrak's voice dropped, the words heavy with memory. "I was assigned to Carter's task force as a liaison, responsible for coordinating with the alien units under his command. From the moment I met him, I knew there was something different about him. He was calm, calculating, and always in control. His eyes were cold, like the void of space itself. There was no warmth in them, no emotion. Just focus." The soldiers around the fire leaned in, their fascination tinged with unease. Zyrak continued, their voice steady, but laced with a grim edge. Carter's plan to retake Arthenos was brilliant in its simplicity. He used the terrain against the pirates, trapping their forces in narrow valleys and cutting off their supply lines. Within days, their numbers dwindled, and it seemed victory was inevitable. But Carter wasn't satisfied with a simple victory. He wanted to send a message that no one would forget. Zyrak's claws tapped rhythmically against the stone beside them, the sound echoing in the still night. One night, Carter called a meeting with the senior officers. He outlined his next move, a plan to lure the remaining pirates into an ambush using captured civilians as bait. The idea was horrifying. The civilians were terrified and malnourished, barely able to stand, let alone act as decoys. But Carter didn't waver. He argued that their sacrifice would save countless lives in the long run by ending the pirate threat once and for all. A hushed murmur spread through the platoon, but no one dared interrupt Zyrak. The commander's voice grew sharper, more clipped, as they continued. I protested, as did others, but Carter's authority was absolute. He assured us that the civilians would be unharmed, that the pirates would fall into his trap before they could retaliate. But even as he spoke, I could see the truth in his eyes. He didn't care about the civilians. To him, they were tools, pawns on a chessboard. Zyrak's jaw tightened, the memory clearly weighing on them. The plan went forward. The civilians were placed in a clearing, their fear palpable as they waited for the pirates to arrive. When the ambush was sprung, it was a massacre. Carter's forces decimated the pirate ranks, but not before several civilians were killed in the crossfire. I remember the screams, the chaos. And I remember Carter standing on a ridge, watching it all with that same cold, calculating expression. The soldiers around the fire shifted uncomfortably, their faces a mix of horror and disbelief. Veltrix, the young feline-like soldier, finally found their voice. What happened after? Did anyone hold him accountable? Zyrak's gaze met Veltrix's, their eyes hard as stone. Accountable?
No.
The mission was deemed a success. The pirates were defeated, and Arthenos was liberated. Carter was hailed as a hero. His tactics were brutal, yes, but the Alliance cared only about results. Lives saved, objectives achieved. The ends justified the means. The fire crackled, casting dancing shadows across Zyrak's face. But I couldn't forget. Carter's actions haunted me. He didn't see his enemies or even his allies as people. To him, they were pieces on a board, sacrifices to be made for the greater good. And that, my comrades, is the terrifying truth about humanity. Their capacity for compassion is matched only by their capacity for ruthlessness. Zyrak leaned forward, their voice dropping to a near whisper. They can justify anything. Any action, no matter how cruel or monstrous, can be rationalized in the name of survival or victory. That is their strength and their greatest danger. The soldiers were silent, the weight of the story pressing down on them like a physical force. Some stared into the fire, while others looked away, unwilling to meet Zyrak's gaze. What happened to Carter? Another soldier asked, their voice barely audible. Zyrak's expression darkened. He continued to serve, rising through the ranks. To this day, his name is spoken with admiration in some circles, revulsion in others. But for me, he remains a reminder that humans are not heroes or monsters. They're both. And that duality is what makes them so unpredictable, so dangerous. The fire crackled again, filling the silence that followed. The soldiers sat in uneasy contemplation, the image of Major Carter looming large in their minds. As the night stretched on, they couldn't help but wonder. What would they do, faced with the same choices? Would they follow Carter's path, or resist it? Zyrak sat back, their posture rigid, their expression unreadable. The story was done, but the lesson lingered, etched into the minds of all who had listened. ####4. The lesson of humanity ****. The night wore on, the fire burning lower, casting faint shadows over the huddled soldiers. Zyrak's tales lingered in the air like a heavy fog, wrapping the listeners in the weight of hard truths. The soldiers were no longer merely sitting around a fire. They were standing on the edge of understanding, peering into the heart of humanity as seen through Zyrak's eyes. There was a pause, the kind of silence that grows not from unease, but from deep reflection. When Zyrak finally spoke again, their voice was quieter, almost contemplative. 2 stories, Zyrak said, their gaze drifting between the fire and the faces of their comrades. 2 humans. One, Corporal Reyes, who embodied their resilience and their light. The other, Major Carter, who wielded their ruthlessness and their darkness. Both are true reflections of what it means to be human. The soldiers remained still, hanging on Zyrak's every word. Veltrix, the youngest of them, shifted uncomfortably, their feline ears flicking back. "Commander," they began hesitantly, "are humans good or evil? Should we fear them or trust them?" Zyrak turned their piercing yellow gaze on Veltrix, their expression unreadable. The answer is not so simple, they said. Humans are neither inherently good nor inherently evil. They are something far more dangerous. They are capable of choice. It is this ability, this freedom, that defines them and makes them unpredictable. The soldiers stirred, uneasy with the ambiguity of Zyrak's answer. The Ursulid warrior, Barak, rumbled from across the fire, his deep voice tinged with frustration. What good is that to us? If we cannot know what to expect from them, how can we fight beside them? How can we trust them? Zyrak leaned forward, their movements deliberate. You trust them the same way you trust the stars not to fall from the sky. Not because they are constant, but because they have the potential to guide you. Humans are not to be controlled, Barak. They are to be understood. And in that understanding, you will find the strength to work with them, or against them, should the need arise. Barak grunted, unsatisfied but unwilling to challenge the commander further. Veltrix, however, was not so easily deterred. But, Commander, if they're so unpredictable, doesn't that make them dangerous to the Alliance? How can we rely on them when we don't know what they'll do next? Zyrak sighed, a low rumble that seemed to echo in their chest. Yes, Veltrix, they are dangerous. But so is every weapon we wield in this war. Humans are no different from the plasma cannons on our ships or the fusion bombs we drop on enemy strongholds. Their power comes from their ability to adapt, to change, to surprise. It is up to us to guide them, to temper that power and ensure it is used wisely. The soldiers fell silent again, pondering Zyrak's words. The fire crackled softly, its warmth a stark contrast to the cold truth of the commander's stories. Finally, another voice spoke, a quiet, measured tone belonging to the HFY's tactician, Seelan. Commander, it sounds as though humans possess both the capacity for greatness and the potential for destruction. Does that not make them like us? Like all of us? Zyrak's eyes met Seelan's, and for the first time that night, a faint smile played across their scaled features. You are wiser than you let on, Seelan, they said. Yes, humans are like us, but they are also different in ways we cannot ignore. Most species are bound by their nature, by instincts and traditions that dictate their actions. Humans, on the other hand, are bound only by their choices. That freedom sets them apart, and makes them a force unlike any other in this galaxy. The soldiers murmured among themselves, the tension easing as Zyrak's words began to sink in. But the commander was not finished. They straightened, their voice taking on the commanding tone of a leader imparting a final, vital lesson. Do not let their duality fool you into complacency, Zyrak said. Humans are capable of unimaginable cruelty, yes, but they are also capable of unparalleled sacrifice. You must not judge them by one act, one individual. Instead, judge them by the sum of their choices, by the legacy they leave behind. Zyrak paused, letting the weight of their words settle over the group. In the end, it is not about fearing humans or trusting them. It is about understanding them. And in doing so, you may come to understand something about yourselves. The fire crackled again, the night growing darker as the embers began to fade. Veltrix looked up at the commander, their youthful curiosity tempered by the gravity of Zyrak's stories. Do you think humanity will ever change, Commander? They asked quietly. Do you think they'll ever stop being so unpredictable? Zyrak's smile returned, faint but genuine. Change is the one constant in the universe, Veltrix. And if there's one thing I've learned about humans, it's that they are always changing. Sometimes for better, sometimes for worse. But that is what makes them remarkable. That is what makes them worth fighting alongside, and if necessary, fighting against. The soldiers nodded slowly, their faces reflecting a mix of understanding and unease. The night stretched on, the fire reduced to glowing embers. One by one, the soldiers drifted away, retreating to their tents or the solitude of the night. Only Veltrix remained, their wide eyes still fixed on Zyrak. Thank you, Commander, they said softly, for helping us see them, not as legends, but as they really are. Zyrak nodded, their gaze returning to the dying fire. Remember this lesson, Veltrix. Humanity is not a mystery to be solved or a threat to be feared. they're a mirror, showing us the best and worst of what we can become. And that, they added, their voice barely above a whisper, is what makes them truly extraordinary. The young soldier lingered for a moment before finally stepping away, leaving Zyrak alone with their thoughts. The fire burned low, casting the commander's shadow long across the ground. And in the quiet of the night, Zyrak closed their eyes, the memories of Reyes and Carter swirling in their mind. Two sides of the same coin, two faces of a species both terrifying and inspiring. As the last ember faded, Zyrak whispered to themselves, a vow carried only by the wind. May we always remember, and may we always choose wisely.